Welcome to the podcast. If you'd like to listen to an ad-free version of this episode and all of our episodes, then search True Crime Today Premium Plus on Apple Podcasts and press subscribe. That's our premium channel where all of our ad-free and advanced episodes live, all in one place. True Crime Today Premium Plus. Search it on Apple Podcasts and press subscribe. Even try it for 3 days free.
You're about to take a deep dive into one of the biggest true crime cases in the universe. Or, at least, on our part of the planet. From the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.
You guys wanted us to do a deep dive on the Menendez brothers, right?
Yeah.
And, well, this case, it's really cemented in true crime, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
So we're going deeper than the headlines you might remember.
Right.
We've got this new Netflix documentary.
Uh-huh.
And it's got new stuff from Erik and Lyle Menendez themselves.
Wow.
Plus, we're hearing from lawyers, journalists, even some of the jurors.
Oh, wow.
It's like getting a peek behind the curtain 35 years later.
It's wild how much there is to unpack, right?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that struck me is how this documentary tries to go beyond just the sensationalism.
It really does. It's not about excusing what they did, but you do get a sense of context.
Yeah.
Like their stories, their experiences. It's powerful.
Yeah. And it makes you rethink those initial reactions so many people had.
Yeah.
You know, spoiled rich kids.
Yeah.
I mean, even the spending spree after the murders. The documentary presents this whole different view.
Really?
Like I say, it was like this desperate attempt to escape their grief, to fight off thoughts of suicide. Not about enjoying the money, but more like a distraction.
That's interesting. See, that's where things get really fascinating, right?
Right.
The documentary really makes you think about the complexities of trauma. Because, you know, their behavior, it was extreme, obviously.
Of course.
But maybe it was a way of coping, you know, not healthy, obviously, but...
Right. So what could even make someone go to those lengths? It's difficult to even fathom.
Well, think about it. When someone's under that much pressure, the human psyche is capable of. It's a lot to process, and the documentary really emphasizes that. Like Erik especially felt this immense pressure, you know, even in death, to meet his dad's expectations. There's this part where he says suicide to his dad would have been the ultimate failure.
Wow. Can you imagine carrying that kind of burden?
Exactly. And it just adds this really chilling layer to their actions. And, you know, that whole idea of something being off comes up again when Erik talks about the police.
What do you mean?
He seems genuinely surprised that they weren't suspects sooner.
Really?
Yeah, like there were these oversights in that initial investigation. Erik even brings up some pretty obvious clues.
Like what?
Gunpowder residue, shell casings from his car found near the scene. It's not like these were hidden details, right?
Yeah, right. It makes you wonder, how did they miss that?
Right. Well, it happens more than you'd think. Tunnel vision in investigations is really common.
Tunnel vision.
Yeah, like they get locked onto one narrative. Sometimes they overlook evidence that doesn't fit. And you can't rule out the whole wealth factor.
Right.
I mean, consciously or not, their money, their social standing, it might have created this bias, like a shield, you know?
So their wealth almost made them invisible.
Exactly. And you know what this all leads to, right? The media frenzy, especially with Lyle's arrest. He actually describes it in the documentary.
Yeah. How so?
He called it a spectacle, like it was orchestrated for the cameras for maximum impact.
Right. The SWAT team, the whole thing.
Yeah.
He even said it was like arresting like a drug kingpin.
Exactly. The media has this undeniable power in shaping how we see things. Public perception, jury opinions, even legal strategies. And speaking of media influence, we can't forget what loomed over their retrial.
Oh, you mean OJ?
Exactly. The O.J. Simpson trial.
Yeah, and that was...
It's almost like it cast a shadow over everything.
It really does make you think.
Because Lyle himself said the timing couldn't have been worse. The O.J. acquittal just days before their retrial.
Days.
He said it had a profound impact on their case. And there's this one detail that always gets me. During the Menendez retrial, the judge wouldn't allow evidence of the brothers' alleged abuse.
Wait, what? Why not?
Because they weren't women. So the battered women syndrome didn't apply to their case.
Hold on. They couldn't even present that evidence. That's
right.
I mean, that's hard to wrap your head around.
Right. And it shows just how big cases like O.J. Simpson's can have a ripple effect. It's possible the judge was trying to avoid another controversial outcome, but in the process.
Well, it's like they were caught in this crossfire.
You could say that. Yeah, a huge crossfire. I mean, the O.J. trial had this massive cultural impact, right? And legally, too.
No doubt.
It really makes you think maybe it even tilted the scales against the Menendez brothers, even if it wasn't intentional.
It's like, how can you even be sure of a fair trial when something that big just happened? Those precedents, it had to weigh in everyone's minds.
Absolutely. And then you've got the brothers themselves, right? Decades later, their stories are changing.
Yeah, especially Erik.
He's carrying a lot of guilt now. You can hear it in his voice.
In the documentary, he actually says everything was his fault, that he dragged Lyle into it all.
It's heavy stuff.
After all this time, how do we even interpret that?
It really makes you think about survivors' guilt.
Right.
Especially with a family history like theirs. All those years keeping the abuse a secret.
Yeah, and don't forget, Erik only confessed in the first place because of the guilt. He couldn't handle it anymore.
Exactly. And he wanted to die, he said. He told the therapist that.
Makes you wonder what keeping that bottled up for so long does to a person.
It's heartbreaking, honestly. This isn't just about some crime, right? It's about the human cost, the scars left behind, the ways the justice system
Sometimes fails.
Sometimes fails, yeah. We want answers in these true crime cases. We crave them, but
life's messy.
Messier than we'd like. And speaking of messy, did you get a chance to check out that never-before-seen footage they talked about?
I did. And those new interviews, too.
Yeah.
There was just so much, but those juror interviews, wow.
Right. I mean, how often do you get to hear directly from a juror?
Never. And to hear Hazel Thorne say she really thinks the abuse evidence, if it had been allowed,
it could have changed everything.
She was convinced.
It makes you wonder, did the OJ case reach all the way into that jury deliberation room?
It's like the timing of it all, that cultural moment, it was a force of its own. It makes you wonder, what if this had all happened now? Today? Would people see it differently, knowing what we know now about trauma, about abuse?
That's the question, isn't it? We're in a different world now, aren't we? We talk more about these things.
We do.
A jury today, they'd have all that extra knowledge. Would they see the brothers differently? Who knows? But
it makes you think.
It really does.
And it just goes to show this idea of justice, it's not some fixed thing, right? It's like at the heart of it all, we're always reassessing, right? What we thought then, what we know now.
Exactly. This case, the Menendez brothers, it reminds us that justice, it's not a line in the sand. It changes as we do, as the world changes.
Yeah, and this whole deep dive, it's really brought that home. It's easy to get caught up in the crime itself. But when you really look at it, the abuse, the media, there's stories changing after all these years.
It's a lot.
It becomes less about the headlines and more about,
humanity.
Exactly. And this documentary doesn't give you easy answers.
Yeah.
It's more about think for yourself.
For sure. It challenges those biases we all have, makes you realize our ideas about justice, they're always evolving.
Always. And I think that might be the biggest takeaway here. Even after all this time, the Menendez story, it makes us confront some uncomfortable stuff.
It really does. About justice, about trauma, about how much power the media has. It sparks these conversations we need to be having.
Conversations that matter. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to think about. Imagine you're on that jury today. Knowing what we know now, how would you judge them? Makes you think, right? Because this search for justice, it never really ends. It's something we always have to keep questioning, keep pushing for.
In a world where the darkest secrets lie just beneath the surface.
They said it was an accident, but the evidence says otherwise.
Where hidden killers roam, unnoticed, in the shadows.
I think you would definitely be looking at a blend of toxic, very bad narcissistic personality traits, and they will be vengeful and possibly resort to violence.
Join Tony Bruschi as he uncovers the truth behind the most chilling cases.
They said it was an accident, but the evidence clearly says otherwise.
Each episode, we dig deep into the minds of those who commit the unthinkable.
To your point on narcissism, he thinks in his own mind how witty he is.
Yeah.
But he lost that jury. I was done with him in 2 minutes.
From unsolved mysteries to infamous crimes.
Geez, you've just talked about how you've taught yourself how to do everything under the sun. I bet you did a YouTube video, how to best kill somebody with a knife.
Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi takes you where few dare to go.
How does someone with such a dark secret go unnoticed for so long?
With multiple new episodes every single day.
We're not just telling stories, we're seeking justice.
Listen now on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi.